Welcome to the June 6, 2017 Murfreesboro City Council special meeting. The only topic that we have on our agenda is the market update. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Lyons.
Sure. Mayor and Council, we're pleased to have Lori Messer of Gallagher with us today. Now, for some of the council members who have been here for a little while, you'll remember when we developed a focus and framework document that preceded the MAG study. That firm, Fox Lawson, was bought out by Gallagher. So we're back working with this firm again. City Council had made a policy decision to do regular updates of our pay market and actually accelerated it. This study was delivered a year earlier because you wanted to make sure that the city was current to the market. So in a moment, Mr. Godwin's going to introduce Lori Messer, who's going to present the results of, it's actually a total compensation study. We looked both at our salaries and what the market is for salaries as well as the city's benefits. And she's going to go over that. Now, first things first, there is no action for the council to take today. There is no vote that we're asking for. We felt it was important for Ms. Messer to present the results of her report, give you an opportunity to ask some questions, and then as you'll hear at the very end of the presentation, we know you may have additional questions or maybe some follow-up information that you'll want. So no vote is necessary today. So today's really the introduction and the first conversation of what could be several conversations. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Godwin to introduce the consultant.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons, and good afternoon, Mayor, members of Murfreesboro City Council. I'm delighted to introduce Ms. Lori Messer. As Mr. Lyons mentioned, Lori is a professional of 30 years in this space. She is currently Senior Project Manager and Senior Consultant for Fox Lawson Group, which is a division of Arthur J. Gallagher. Arthur J. Gallagher is an international consulting firm, third-party insurance broker, and third-party administrator with over $4 billion in revenue and 25,000 employees. This particular consulting group is based in Phoenix, Arizona. Ms. Messer arrives with a list of credentials, including, again, approximately 30 years of professional experience. She has a bachelor's in business administration from Arizona State and a master's degree in education from the University of Phoenix. Also a member of World at Work and has earned her CCP professional certification. At this time, I will turn the meeting over to Ms. Messer. Lori?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to come and present the results of the total compensation study. To get started, basically I'm going to provide you with an overview of the study, what we were engaged with the city to do, the methodology we used, and a summary of the salary data comparisons, as well as the pay structure, our recommendations there, and then an overall summary of findings related to compensation, pay practices, and benefits. And then we have a couple of administrative recommendations. The packet you have in front of you that we put together is quite large. I believe it's about 67 pages. The first 16 pages or so are what we're going to go over, high-level overview. Beyond that, the rest of the information is supplemental backup to the overall summary results. So, that being said, just to give you a little bit of background, we were engaged with the city to take a look at base compensation, pay practices, and benefits, and see how the city of Murfreesboro stacks up against the market, as well as make recommendations based on our findings. A major consideration of the city was to ensure that the pay structures, pay practices, and benefits were competitive within the marketplace. And when we talk about market, one of the things I want to, market is a subjective criteria that is based, is highly dependent upon who the city recruits its people from and who it loses its people to. So at the onset of the study, we did determine what would be an appropriate market for the city of Murfreesboro in gathering data to make these recommendations. Okay. We are assessing the market based on the market median, which is the 50th percentile of the market. utilizing actual salaries as the primary metric against the city's salary range midpoints. So to start off this study, the first thing that we did is we identified the benchmark jobs. There were 60 jobs that were identified that we actually went out and surveyed against the market. These jobs, one of the things that we try to do is we want to make sure that they are cover all different levels of the organization, from the lowest, most entry-level jobs through the most senior-level jobs in the organization. And we also want to make sure that they are representative across all of the different departments within the organization. Then we developed a custom survey to go gather the data. The survey was distributed to 36 different organizations, which I do have detailed on here. We gathered the data, we validated it, we performed some statistical analyses with it, known as regression analysis, and then we also applied geographic differentials to the data. Several of the organizations were in different geographic markets, and so it's important that we take the data that we collect and we apply geographic differentials so that we have an apples-to-apples comparison. In other words, the data that we do the final analysis on is based on the cost of labor here in the city of Murfreesboro. Additionally, our firm follows the U.S. Department of Justice and Federal Trade Commission guidelines that indicate that in order to conduct statistical analysis and start drawing conclusions based on the data, you need to have at least 5 matches for a job. So if we had a benchmark job that we only got 4 data points on, you'll see in the report in specific sections that there is no overall summary for that particular job. You'll see an NA in the market data section because it didn't meet that criteria of 5 matches in the marketplace. Okay? All right. So we gathered a variety of statistics as we analyzed the data, but as I mentioned earlier, the primary metric that we were looking at is the median of the market. When we take a look in defining the level of competitiveness of the city's structures and benefits, we have some basic guidelines. If the city is within 5% of the market, plus or minus, we consider that to be highly competitive. You're pretty on target with the market. If you're 5 to 10% within the market, either plus or minus, we consider that to be competitive. If a particular data point is 10 to 15% off the market, plus or minus, there may be some possible misalignment with the market. And if it's greater than 15%, we consider that to be significantly misaligned with the market. Now, I'd like to make some clarifications around these metrics. We see this as a beginning point, right? So if we happen to see a particular job that may be 20% off the market, whether it be leading or lagging the market, that's indicative of us that, well, let's take a look at that particular job and see why might that be. And there's a variety of reasons in which a job may be 20% off the market, and they could be reasonable explanations that tell us that, okay, well, we're okay with that data point being where it is. And let me give you an example of that. Entry-level jobs typically tend to be high turnover jobs, right? Because people at an entry-level job often move to the next level. So what we tend to see in those types of jobs is that the pay in the market is relatively low because you have people coming in and within a year or two they're moving on. So then you bring in a new person and now they're at the minimum of the range. So what you end up seeing is that the pay in the market for that particular job tends to be relatively low because it's an entry-level job. But when we compare it to your midpoint, it may look as though the city is paying really high in the marketplace for that job, when the reality is that just happens to be a high-turn job because it's an entry-level job that's the beginning for people to move on to other levels within the organization. Yes?
Would you like for us to stop as you are doing it and ask questions, or just jot our questions down at the end, ask you?
I am fine with an interactive if you have questions as we're going through.
I do.
Okay.
When you said that you have found us to be highly competitive as far as the market is concerned, I haven't really found that to be necessarily, because we have a lot of people, a lot of turnover. They are and they are leaving to go places within 10-mile radius, making more. So when you say market, can you define market?
Yes, yes. In this particular, if you, I think we're kind of jumping just a little bit ahead. Actually,
But when you get to it, we can talk about
we
it.
have a list of like 36 on slide 19 and 20. We have the list of 36 organizations that we identified as the comparator market. Okay. We worked with the city to develop those, and I believe things that we looked at when it came to these particular organizations, how we identified, we looked at organizations in which the city recruits its talent from or loses its talent to, organizations that are within certain proximity of the city, organizations in which so there's a broader scope in some areas because, for example, professional level jobs, you're not just limited to within a 50-mile radius of the city of Murfreesboro. You have a wider span of where you would recruit people from. So on page 19 and 20, it breaks out specifically what jobs and what organizations were compared for what jobs. So we did not take a city of, let me get to that page so I can kind of explain it a little bit more. So for example, sworn public safety, we had a much wider net. We went to Knoxville, Memphis, because typically those positions, there's a wider recruiting market for those jobs. Other jobs, like non-exempt jobs, we typically stayed within a 50-mile radius. We also included some organizations that were outside of Tennessee, but that had a comparable makeup to the city of Murfreesboro. As it turns out, it's kind of irrelevant because those 4 organizations did not participate in the study. They didn't return the survey, so we didn't gather data on them, unfortunately. Yes. So any questions on the market? We also looked at some water districts for jobs. It was a little unfortunate. We looked at some airports too. Unfortunately, the utility districts didn't want to play nicely and fill out the survey. Sometimes utility districts can be a little sensitive about their data, so they don't want to share it. But otherwise, from all of the other municipal organizations like other cities, counties, states, we did got a really good response rate.
Quick question, Rob. So utility districts are those governmental agencies? So are they under the same guidelines that we're under? When I say like maybe some of our local utility district.
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons they're included is we compete for talent with them. So some of our water and sewer personnel can go work at CUD because the skill on the job is very much the same.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question as it relates to the returning of these? And it sort of just came to me. But, you know, in the process that we went through a couple of years ago, it was new to me from not being in government world. But, you know, basically there was a link on our webpage that you could see person by person their pay. You know, it was public knowledge, and our kind of understanding was that that's the way it is in municipalities. You know, if that exists, why do we have to rely on studies? I mean, is there not a place where we can just go get other cities?
I have not found that. As a matter of fact, for the organizations that didn't respond, we went to their websites to see if we could possibly extract information, find job matches, find salary ranges. And for those that were in red, we were not successful in finding that. And also, most organizations, a lot of them do not publish individual employee salaries on their websites. I know I've seen some, but some organizations go as far as making you do a public records request to obtain that information, which is a lot of pay, as your city clerks know and whatnot. A lot of paperwork involved in that, and
Okay.
And that's actually one of the things that when we do a survey like this, our city staff gets surveys all the time A lot of them end up going in the garbage can because you've got your job to do. But once in a while, you'll try to help out. That's why you have to have the balancing act of not making the survey something that's going to take somebody 2 hours to respond. You really have to be selective, so you entice them to say, we'll give you the results, but we're going to need a little bit of your time. If you ask too much, it ends up in the garbage can because they've got their job to do, and they're in some ways doing you a favor. So you've got to try to find a little bit of that happy medium in there.
Another thing about the market, and I think Councilmember Harris, you had kind of referenced this. When we look at the data that we collect, it's important to keep in mind we are looking at the 50th percentile of the market, which is the median. So what that means is if you have a group of 11 organizations that you're comparing with, or 10 organizations, 5 are going to pay more and 5 are going to pay less. Okay? So unless you're at the 100th percentile of the market, there's always someone who's going to be paying more than you. And in this case, when you're at the 50th, half of those organizations are going to pay more and half are going to pay less. It's definitely
Looking
right in the
at,
middle.
The cities that did respond, I guess I'm just finding it a little hard to comprehend how we can be compared to like Jackson and Collierville and Smyrna when they don't even have near the volume we have. And comparing us to cities like that, when I'm thinking about a comparison, as long as I've been on the council and the studies we've gotten back, some of the cities I see that we compare ourselves to, there's no comparison as far as the volume, the responsibilities. For instance, here, Smyrna, Jackson, Hendersonville, Franklin. I mean, I just fail to see the comparison, how we can be compared to places like that with we're the 10th largest, fastest growing place, and we are comparing in our survey to places like this.
The reason that
Not
we...
putting the
yeah.
places down, but they don't have the commodities, they don't have the volume, they don't have...
The reason that we had looked at those cities had to do primarily with the size of the city as well as their budget.
It doesn't compare to our size and our budget.
But wouldn't like Smyrna and Franklin, wouldn't those cities be comparable cities in the sense that those are within driving range? They're 20 miles down the road. So basically, that would be somebody that you might lose an employee to if their benefits were better or lesser. They might be wanting to come here. So I do think there's an analogy when we look at the Franklins and the Smyrnas to make sure that there's a relationship as far as geographic location. I think they're important that they play a role in where we stand.
Any position in which we compared the non-exempt to, it would be a combination of things, and one being proximity, because we consider a 50-mile radius of the city of Murfreesboro as a relevant competitor for non-exempt jobs. Because what we do know about non-exempt jobs is people in non-exempt jobs in a city government comprises a lot of employees, and they're mostly in your operational ranks. And those people in those jobs will leave for 25 cents an hour. They will drive a half an hour for 50 cents an hour. So that's why we felt it important to include those that were in a close proximity to the city.
I think Franklin and Smyrna, those are cities that we absolutely have to compete with, from an employee base. So I'm okay with that. One thing that might go to her question that is, maybe a little more math than what anybody cares about, but, as far as if we're talking about how much volume, how much work do we do, is there any kind of metrics in here that would be sort of like and I'm just going to use the police department just because I just looked at Carl back there, which is like, okay, well, if we have, if we've got 135,000 people, and just to make my math easy, we've got 135 police officers, so we've got one for every 1,000 citizens. Is there any way that, because we could obviously look at that and go, well, Brentwood only has, they've got one police officer every 100 citizens. They're clearly not going to have the volume that we would have. You see, I mean, is there a way that we could look, I mean, I know that's probably, again, more math than we probably asked for, but that's a way that we might be able to measure or get some sort of measure of that in it. Or,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and we probably could do that, but probably the one thing that it would involve is additional cost, because there would be a survey before the survey to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
able to get to that level of detail about the organization.
that's something we could kind of look at, is if we could figure out sort of what that ratio looked like, then we could kind of, at least for our knowledge, say, oh, well, hey, look, we're coming in at exactly the same as Brentwood, just for
I
that
think
matter.
part of, and I know this is a challenge every time when we talk about the salary surveys. Look, nobody's like Murfreesboro, but
Yeah.
one of the surveys in here is Nashville. Well, nobody's like Nashville. Everybody is unique. But one of the charts that they included in here, it's on the next page, on page 21, they try to roll up the demographics. We have small communities like, relatively speaking, Smyrna to Nashville. They're both in the survey, but when you look at how it kind of evens out on page 21, similar number of customers, similar size operating budget. The number of full-time employees is kind of looks like Murfreesboro, and the number of job classifications is relatively close. Nobody's a complete perfect match to Murfreesboro. We're just trying to get a sense of the world out there. What does pay look like? And when you add in the big communities and the little communities, some that are busier than us, some who are not, it's a relatively realistic picture of who we are. Again, we are unique.
When we did the MAG study 3 years ago, I think one of the things that you heard from the council is that we wanted to know what I would say our competitors, which would be our market, maybe the cities and counties that surround Murfreesboro, to make sure that we're comparing, what an employee makes in Davidson County compared to Rutherford County or Murfreesboro or Mount Juliet, or that way we can see what those comparisons would be. Because we're more likely to lose an employee to drive to Nashville as opposed to someone who's going to drive to Chattanooga. Although I know I don't think he's here. We've got several firefighters who drive from Cookeville, don't we? So I think that may be the thing that that maybe some of those municipalities are looking to drive to Murfreesboro as opposed to Murfreesboro driving out. But I like that I'm not as concerned with what Cary, North Carolina pays, Winchester, but I'm more concerned with what Hendersonville pays and what Davidson County pays and our surrounding counties.
I think from the looks of it, most of all of the cities did in Tennessee and the surrounding area did respond. Those out-of-state organizations, their data's not included in here because they didn't respond. And then several of the counties, Knox County did not respond, but the others, Hamilton, Nashville, Davidson, Rutherford, Williamson, did respond. So, the market, there are a variety of things you can look at. When we say comparable size, too, I should define how we define that. I guess I should share that. We define a comparable city as one that's no less than half your size and one that's no more than twice your size. So just to put some parameters around that. And those were the primary: proximity, size, things of that nature. Those are the primary things that we were looking at when we assisted the city in defining who the competitive market was. Okay. So then on page, I'm sorry, I have to keep putting my glasses on because I can't see you and I can't see the report. Side 6. This is an overall summary of the salary data comparisons. And what we did find is that the city is in a highly competitive position in the marketplace on all metrics that we looked at. From looking at salary range data for your non-sworn positions as well as the sworn positions, from looking at the data from an actual pay perspective, and then also from looking at the data when we compare your range midpoints to what's actually being paid in the marketplace. To me, knowing that you had, the city had done a compensation study a couple of years ago, and a couple years later you're coming to do an update. In the meantime, you have made adjustments to your pay structure to attempt to keep pace with the market. It's really a testament to how well the city has done in managing their pay program. This is a beautiful thing to see, that it's been maintained over time from when this original study was done. So I would just like to point that out. There are a couple of different metrics that we look at depending on the group of employees that we're looking at. For the general population, we look at the city's midpoints compared to what's actually being paid in the marketplace. Okay. And we use that as a metric to determine how competitive your pay structure is. For the sworn positions, sworn police and sworn fire, we look at range maximums. And the reason we look at range maximums for level of competitiveness is because in sworn positions, they're a little bit different than the non-sworn positions in that we define them as career level occupations. So what that means is, in a career level occupation, it is not unusual to see someone start their career as a police officer or a firefighter and end it there. There's nothing unusual about that. It happens all of the time. And so that's why we call them career level positions. So that is why we focus on the range maximums of those jobs. It is unusual, however, to find someone who starts their career as a receptionist or as an accounting clerk and they end it there. That's not as common as it is in the sworn ranks. So when we looked at the general population, we saw that your pay structure is leading the market by 2.2%. When we look at sworn fire and sworn police, sworn fire is leading by 1.1%. It's almost, spot on with the market. And sworn police is leading by 3.3%.
So,
Yes.
I'm sorry, but can you go through one time with us? Are we supposed to be taking these numbers and looking at the page before this to give us an idea of highly competitive, possible misalignment? Does that page before this have anything to do with this page?
Yeah, so what those metrics are, saying plus or minus 5% is highly competitive. I know, I apologize, it's not on this slide, it's on other slides, that little chart that talks about the competitiveness. But you are correct that those levels of competitiveness shown on slide 5 do link to this page on slide 6 with the circled numbers.
And I apologize, can you kind of explain to us why that is? My general mindset had this going towards something that said, if we're 15% like above median, that would be really great. That would be highly competitive if we were, when I was looking at greater than 15%, I thought that was a minus 15%. So tell me, why is it good to be really close to the median?
Because it aligns with your compensation philosophy of the organization that says you want to pay your employees at the median of the market. So the closer you are to the median, the more competitive you are in the market based on your compensation philosophy.
Okay, gotcha.
Does that make sense?
If we look at, on your summary of data that we have there, if we look at the general, we're the market median actual salary versus city salary range midpoint for general, we're 2.2% above the median, correct?
Correct.
But for fire, we're 4.1% below what the median is.
For fire and police, there are two numbers circled in green. We focus, as I mentioned, on the range maximum because the fact that those are career level jobs.
Right.
And so we focus on the range maximum for our primary comparator metric.
Right, but
You don't stay at the entry level.
right, because but the midpoint. So if you've got for instance, a police officer that it's at that midpoint.
Fire.
Or fire, yeah. So we're right now. If we have a firefighter, we're saying that they're 4.1% below what
A mid-level fire.
a mid-level firefighter would make.
Yes, when we compare your range midpoint for, and this is collective of all the fire positions, and we compare that to what people are actually being paid in the market, you would be lagging by 4.1%.
Is the question, and this is not really to you, you know, I think one of the discussions that we need to have as a council, that, you know, it's great to show what our salary maximum range is. I think that's great. But if we don't get people to that maximum range, that's where more people are going to look at what the median is as opposed to what their maximum could be. I mean, if
If they leave us halfway through their career because they're not getting paid enough, it doesn't matter what the maximum.
It doesn't matter what the maximum
Is that right?
Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
Is it?
You know, the thing that I would compare, though, with police and fire, if for an organization to make the comparison against actual pay in the market compared to like your range midpoint, I would also want to take into consideration years of service in the job.
Sure.
I think that yeah, and that's one thing that we didn't ask in this particular study, but I just wanted to point that.
Yeah, all of those things would need, you know, longevity, those things that we have would all need to be taken into account. But,
Correct.
you know, I think it's, when I look at that, I see the 1.1% on the salary maximum, which is we're ahead of that. But if we don't have the platform for someone to get there, then the number that 4% below is what.
And we anticipated, you know, one of the questions we had anticipated was the hiring amount. And in the backup information, you're going to see some of the charts about where we're at on starting pay for police and fire, because it really does become a recruitment issue, and I think you'll see some data later.
Let's go through, since we've got this, let's go through and get the information that gets us to those points, and that way we're not asking questions that we haven't seen all the information yet.
And Mayor, like I said at the very beginning, we know you're going to have some additional questions and follow-up, so we're glad to take our time with it. And
Right, let's go through that, because what I see is they starting so far behind, they'll never catch up. Or either never come to any comparison to where they should be. So yeah, let's see that, because I'm very interested in that.
So
Because based on years of service, they're still not going to ever catch up on the median, from what I'm seeing.
If you look at slide 28 and 29, slides 28 and 29 detail specifically the sworn fire jobs, where they start, the range minimums, as well as the range maximums. That's 28, and slide 20 or 29 covers the sworn police. Now, how they progress through the range is more of a policy level type of decision, but when we look at the range minimums for the firefighter and the fire driver, the range minimums are also highly competitive with the market. The firefighter 1 is leading by 1.8%, and the fire driver is leading by 3.6%. When we look at fire captain and fire battalion chief, fire captain is lagging by 1.2%, and that's still considered highly competitive. And the fire battalion chief range minimum is leading by 1.7%. So when we look at your range minimums, they are highly competitive with the market as well at each of the individual job levels. I think the issue, what I'm hearing, is that in the other organizations, are the firefighters, sworn fire and sworn police, are they able to progress to the maximum, and how long does it take them to get there?
Forever.
Well, that's not necessarily. I think what I was asking was what I think I was agreeing with him on was more along the lines of, we don't want to be trailing, if we've got a 16-year time frame to get from point A to be topped out or whatever, that 8 years into the deal, if we're 4% behind the average pay out there, that they're not going to stay till they're topped out and then become 1% higher. So, I think this is just going to be more of a policy decision that we have to make to determine how we want to deal with whether or not we think that's a lag. I just want to make sure we're understanding that correctly, that we are behind 5 of the 10 that responded by the number. We're 4.1% behind number 5 out of 10. The median.
Right. when
Right.
you look at actual pay, when you use the actual pay comparison. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So, and then, if we go to page 7, I think, are there any other questions on page 6 before I move on to page 7?
The only other question I would have, can we, so this table that you have here, would it be easy if we wanted to make policy decisions that we could go through, and if we wanted to say, you know, we want the minimum to be X percent, the maximum to be X percent, how do we get to that point? Is that something that's fairly easy to be able to do that? Does it make?
I'm not,
So if we said for like our salary range maximum, we're at 2.3% for general, or 1.1 for fire, 3.3 for police. If we said we wanted those to be 5s, we want those to be 5%.
okay, yeah.
And we want our market median actual salary versus city salary range midpoint. We want to make a policy decision on how do we get that to X percent above that midpoint. Is that
Yeah.
easy to quantify how to do that?
I mean, I'm just thinking through the mathematical way of going about, like, yeah, because it would just, an algebraic
I
equation.
guess really what
to get to
the
5%.
whole goal of, and I want to get into it and not hijack the conversation, but my whole goal was to look at and say, we don't just want to be at the midpoint. We want to say, let's find how much above the midpoint that we want to be able to recruit the talent we need to recruit and keep the talent we need to keep. How do we get to that point?
So some options are, that is one way to say, you know, we want to be 5% above, or you can say we want to be at the 50th percent plus 5%, the median plus 5%, and that's an easy calculation because you figure out what the median is and then you add 5% to it.
Right.
So that just becomes a change in the overall philosophy, which then would translate easy to take the market data that we've collected and translate it into what would that look like from a pay structure perspective. Because as you know, as you've been perhaps been flipping through, we're not making any recommendations to any of the structures based on the median of the market because we're seeing that you're actually leading, you're highly competitive. However, if the city were to change its philosophy and say, you know, let's look at the median plus 5%, or make the jump of we want to pay at the 60th percentile. Now, when you go from the median to the 60th percentile, it's not 10%. Technically, it's not a 10% jump. So I would just want to clarify that too, because sometimes that can get confusing for folks. So if you choose to change the overall philosophy, we have the data, we can do the models of what would your pay structures look like, would there be any cost implications, and what would they look like?
Okay. All right. We're ready.
Great. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, 7. We did do a regression analysis to determine how does the city's structures look, how do they stack up against the marketplace? And the reason we use regression analysis, it's basically just a fancy way of math that helps us in making data-driven decisions. It's all about the numbers, it's all about the pay grades, and what would the city's pay line look like? Basically, all of your midpoints through all of your grades, what would it look like based on the statistical analysis? When we did the regression analysis, we want to make sure that, do we have, what it helps to tell us is our data valid and reliable in order to develop a pay structure? And the numbers came out, I won't go into all of the details, but the numbers came out very good and said the market data that we collected based on your internal hierarchy, it looks good. And so based on that, we did we did take a look at what would it look like for the pay structure. And what we found was it would actually go down. If we were to take the results of the regression analysis and build your pay structure, the pay structure would go down.
But that's based upon an assumption that we would want to be at the median.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, so I think, here's, I think you're doing awesome. Thank you so much, by the way you're presenting this, and the information looks great. I think kind of understand the definition of competitive sounds a little different from maybe what our policy is to what I was sort of thinking competitive meant. To me, competitive means when people apply for a job here, we're gonna be in the hunt to get that person if we really want them. Mm-hmm. That to me is saying we're really competitive. To say, well, there's 5 ahead of us and there's 5 behind us and we're kind of right in the middle. We may be average, we may be below average, but median. That's kind of where I think we got to talk about where that happens. But that's the way the only way that it would go down is because obviously we're above the median, and if our policy is to be at median, it would go down, right?
Correct.
All right.
And so because of that, we made a decision. I never like to recommend that you take down pay structures. Our suggestion is you wait it out. You wait a year, you wait 2 years, the market will catch up. So that's why on the next slide, we are not making any recommended changes to the non-sworn pay structure or either of the sworn pay structures. And I do want to point out on your handout that you have, there's a disconnect in numbers. And the very first bullet, I believe yours says 3.8. It should actually say 2.2. It got printed. Sorry about that. Yes.
You said eventually the market would catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Explain that to me.
Okay, so the reason the market would catch up is because salaries are constantly changing on an annual, daily almost basis. As people get new hires, they get promoted, they get increases for whatever reason. So salaries, like the salaries shown in this report and the results in this report, are basically a moment in time. Okay? They're only for a moment in time. Today, if we were to go out and pull these numbers, we could get different results because, again, pay is just a snapshot of a picture in time because tomorrow pay could change as someone gets promoted or gets an increase.
But market and inflation and recession both are drivers onto that particular number.
Correct.
And it's constantly moving.
Constantly
it's
moving.
Not a fixed number.
Yeah.
Right, I understand that, but if we are already so far behind, even with these things happening, that's okay.
Oh,
I just don't see us ever catching up if we're already so far behind.
the report actually shows that you're actually slightly leading the market. And what we tend to find, because we're comparing your salaries, your midpoints to the actual salaries in the market, we have data that shows this. What are the trends in pay movement in states and major metropolitan areas? And in Tennessee, it's roughly, I would say, about 2.8% per year. That's what we have been seeing historically, increases in pay over time. So that being said, if you're currently leading the market on your pay structure by 2.2%, in 1 year, after the market has, supposedly moved 2.8%, you're going to be 0.6% behind. You're still on target. You're still within median. Probably not going to be needing an adjustment to the pay structure again. But the following year, you would. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And when we're comparing different classes, and we're looking at the different cities, I haven't seen the survey, so I don't really know. But are we comparing the apples to apples? For instance, this job here and the same job in another city, do they have the same responsibilities? Do we look at that too?
That's a great question. What we do, the standard compensation metric for matching jobs is 70%. Okay, so because we know that there's no organization that is going to have jobs 100% like yours. And because of that, we would never get data in order to make comparisons. So the standard metric in the compensation world is match your job that's at least a 70% match to this job. So some are closer matches than others, but through our validation process, we hope to capture any of those that may have fallen out of that 70% threshold. So we know that there's a coefficient of error, right? Because we know no job is going to be 100% like yours, so we're looking at jobs that are at least 30% of your job. But they could also be higher matches. You know, they could be right at the 70%, they could be 100%, but it's really difficult to ascertain that level of match through the survey. That's a great question. Okay. So now moving on to the overall, this next section is going to talk about summary of our findings and recommendations for pay practices, and benefits. So if we go to slide 10, again, the first section, I do need to point out, we had some page numbers, pages move around and whatnot, but again, on the major findings for the general structure, that 2.4% in your report is actually 2.2% is shown on the screen. I apologize for that. And then the suggested realignment of positions in the next column under recommendations. Consider realignment of positions as suggested on page 34 of the report, not 33. So here, when we look at the overall structure, we said from a global perspective, you're highly competitive. Now, individual positions, there are some variations in there. There are a few jobs that are over, fall into that significantly misaligned or potentially misaligned, but the majority of jobs fell into the competitive or highly competitive category, which is really good. In sworn fire, we didn't recommend any adjustments to that because we found the overall structure from the range minimums and maximums to be highly competitive, as well as the sworn police structure, no adjustment required. So basically, those were our findings and recommendations on the pay structures. If we move to the next page, page 11, this talks about pay practices. And in pay practices, in 26, we took a look, we had a bunch of questions, but one of them was in 2016, 2017, what was your increases? And we found that across the board, increases are most common in the comparator market. And the city slightly lagged. They gave 2% across the board increases in the pay and the structure. And so it was just slightly lower than the general population in sworn police and sworn fire. However, that being said, we also asked, what are your increases going to be for 2017-2018? And the city's going to currently slightly lead the market when it comes to 2017-2018. So kind of the 2016-2017 and the 2017-2018 kind of balance each other out. So you were slightly lagging on par with the market in 2016-17, and then you're going to lead the market slightly in 2017-18. Yes.
Sorry, would that, and I'm sorry I'm sitting so far away, I gotta keep my leg up.
Oh, that's okay.
So that would assume that we're giving a raise, but our other comparable cities are not giving a raise. We're basing that on their last, or are you giving them the same? I mean.
So yeah, they're going to give an increase, and when we look at those increases that they give, and I forget off the top of my head, they were, I think, going to be around 3%.
Us or our comparable?
The market. So if people's pay is going up 3%, what I had recommended in here, and I'm not sure, I forget what page it's on, I suggested that you make adjustment to your, it's for a few slides down, so I'm kind of jumping ahead, but what I said is probably in 2018, you're going to want to make an adjustment to your salary ranges because this year people are giving increases.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
All right.
It's just not tied together. Okay. Okay. Then when it came to special pays, the most common special pay was for temporary assignments. Temporary assignments being my supervisor is out on leave and I've been asked to temporarily take on the supervisory duties, so how am I going to get paid for that? The city does provide for temporary assignment pay, so you were aligned with the market there, and we didn't recommend any changes. When we looked at variable pay, the most common in the market was longevity pay. The city does provide for longevity pay, so we considered them on par with the market as well when it came to longevity pay. Then we also looked at allowances, and the most common allowance in the market was uniform allowance. The city does provide $800 a year for uniforms for select positions, so we did not, or else uniforms were provided. It was one or the other, so we did not recommend any adjustment there. We did see that the city does lead the market in providing for field training officer pay, that FTO up there. However, we didn't recommend any changes there. FTO pay in the marketplace, based on my experience, is pretty common. So I was a little surprised to see that there wasn't a lot of that in this particular market. Okay, moving on to page 12. Now we're going to jump into, we're going to jump into the benefits portion and what we found when it comes to benefits. When it came to retirement contributions, we found that the city was on par with the market and didn't recommend any changes. The city contributes up to 12.3%. The market average for non-sworn was 11.1%. The market average for sworn personnel was 13%. So, you're right in there, considered highly competitive. When we looked at paid leave, we found that one area in which the city lagged the market was in their not having any personal leave days and not having bereavement days, a separate bereavement bank. My understanding is the city does allow for bereavement pay, but employees take that out of their sick leave balance. And what we found in the marketplace is the majority of organizations had a separate bereavement leave, and they didn't have to use their sick leave. Okay. However, that being said, even though the city doesn't provide for personal leave or bereavement leave, where the city does lead the market when it comes to paid leave is that they don't have a cap on their sick or vacation carryover. And most organizations, due to liability, carrying liabilities on the books, do have a maximum on their paid vacation and paid leave. So that's where the city is with that. When it comes to flexible benefits, the city is comparable to the market. Those are things like pre-tax, having your premiums, your health insurance premiums come out pre-tax, and flexible spending accounts, things like that. The city was comparable to the market, and we didn't recommend any changes there. The city offerings, when it comes to health plans offered, is comparable with the market, so we didn't recommend any change there. The city also offers a PPO plan, which is the most common type of plan in the market. So no change recommended there. We are also aware that the city has a HRA program as well, health plan, which is, I kind of equate that to have some comparability to high deductible health plans in the marketplace, which were the second most common type of health plan. So we didn't recommend any change there. When we looked at health plan premiums, the premiums overall that the city pays versus what the market is paying were comparable until we got to family coverage. What we found is the city's premiums for family coverage were significantly higher than the market. There could be a variety of reasons. We didn't get into, and I provide some examples of what it could be. It could be demographics, it could be experience ratings, it could be things of that nature, but delving into that is beyond the scope of the type of work that I do. So I have made the city staff aware of that, and so there you go. Then when we looked at dental premiums, the city contributions lead the market. It was a small amount. We didn't recommend any changes there. Vision, the city does have a self-funded program there and some part of the market, so no changes recommended there as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you said the health plan premiums were significantly higher than the market for the family plan, you said you have no recommendation on that. Just in your expertise and what you've seen in the market, for you to say significantly higher, is it not a recommendation, but is it a figure you can throw out to us that we may need to look at as far as lowering those figures?
Yeah, what I would suggest is working with your health insurance broker or consultant to help you determine why might, and I'll tell you the actual figures. The city's monthly rate for family coverage is $1,900 per month. The market's average rate of premium for family coverage is around $1,450. So we're talking, that's a pretty significant difference. But it could be for a variety of reasons that, this study didn't go into. But so one example is we were talking about, if you have a really bad experience rating as an organization, it can just, it can hurt your rates. Some organizations only had 2-tiered plans as opposed to 4-tier, where you just have a family or single coverage, and then single plus others, right? And it doesn't matter if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. What we found with those premiums in the market for family coverage, the premiums tended to be a little bit lower, but the problem with a 2-tiered plan is if you are employee plus 1, you're probably paying more than you would otherwise, or if you're employee plus children, you're paying more. So there were probably 4 or 5 organizations that only had 2-tiered plans. That could have something to do with it too. So as to what, but I did share it, with Glenn so he could look into it.
I think you got it back. If you have kids, you're actually paying less. If you don't have kids,
That's right.
you're paying more.
And that was something when we, Ms. Messer made us aware of that. You remember Jake from Cowan that came and talked to us, Jake from State Farm. This is the kind of information we want to share with Cowan, who's our health insurance consultant, to say, okay, help us, dive into this, and why is it? It may be that there's just a funny thing happening with the data that makes it look higher, but we need to learn more, and that's where Cowan can help us with it.
Out of everything that we looked at in this study, that was the biggest anomaly of everything. So. Anyway, moving on to slide 14, when we looked at other insurances such as long-term disability, short-term disability, employee assistance programs, the city's offerings and premiums that they pay was comparable to the market, so no changes recommended. I honestly don't think that we recommended anything through the rest of this. Group life insurance, the city actually leads the market by providing 2 times annual salary up to a maximum of $350,000, which is great. The market only offers $132,000. That was the average coverage level. I do not recommend any change with the city leading the market there. That's a nominal cost benefit that, could potentially be of significant value to employees or their surviving family members. Retiree health insurance, the city was competitive. We didn't recommend any change there, and the wellness program was competitive as well. The city does allow some premium discounts and incentives if you participate in the wellness program, which was really great. Okay, so those were our findings and recommendations there. Then we have some administrative recommendations. Our recommendations are very similar to the recommendations you've heard in the past and what actually the city has been doing with their pay plans, and it shows based on the results of the study we just did. But when it comes to, we do recommend that you update your salary structure on an annual basis to keep pace with the market. As I mentioned, I don't think for 2017-18 you need to make an adjustment because you are where you need to be, but the following year I would recommend an adjustment. We also recommend that that adjustment be a percentage amount based on, you can go a couple of ways. We tend to recommend changes in the cost of labor because we're talking about labor and we're talking about work, and that's the closest metric, to these jobs. Or you can also use some other labor market index. Then we recommend that every 2 to 3 years you do basically a long-term update, which is the process that we've just gone through here with this particular study to validate that you're on pace with the market, you're in good shape. That is the end of the summary of the results, what we found, what we did, how we did it, what we found, and what we recommended. And then the rest of the information in the report is supplemental and supports everything that you've seen in the previous pages. So the report, overall report was quite lengthy. I mean, 67 pages, but we created a summary at the beginning to give you the highlights of what we found, and then all the detail behind it.
So can I ask a big picture question? One of the things that we got to is we started out at a pay study only, and then we went to a total compensation study. And sort of, I guess part of, at least my reasoning for wanting to do that was so that we could, really get an idea of, okay, I'm gonna pick on a police officer. We've got a police officer who gets paid X amount of salary, and at my work, we get a benefit summary every year that lays out in dollars what our benefits are worth to us on a yearly basis. I was kind of hoping we'd have some sort of okay, here's a salary, plus here's the amount of benefits that the city pays versus here's what Franklin pays you in salary versus the total amount of benefits that they pay. I guess, that might just be an average employee. I don't know. I mean, it's specific to me. I mean, I think what you've done is perhaps through saying that we're along with the market, comparable or leading the market in a lot of these benefit sides is probably not really in a mathematical way, but in another way say, our benefits package is going to be very comparable or better to all of these other study groups. So even though we can't put math to it, that's going to be at least in our favor. Is that, can I extrapolate that or not really?
No, I think that I think it's still going to show, like I said, I only saw one anomaly that's actually going to show that your benefits are a little bit higher just because of the $500 amount on that family health coverage. And when we do it, because we don't know what individual people are, we usually take what's the highest amount the city contributes, for example, and we do it that way. The other benefits, so the health insurance was a big one. The other benefits, we know, like long-term disability, short-term disability, you probably see those types of things on yours.
We got an 8%
vacation,
match on our 401k. I mean, what I was looking for was stuff like that.
something like that, more detailed.
Well, I guess I don't know if there's I'm trying to, again, from a policy standpoint, I want to make sure, look, we could talk about just the salary, which I think is where we made a big mistake 2 years ago. Just salary, because if we're paying that police officer $40,000 a year, and again, so is Franklin, but Franklin's giving them a pension, they get twice as many days off, they get paid, they get free health insurance, they get all a benefits package that is significantly richer. I'm not saying they do. I'm saying, for example, if that were to be the case, then we need to be able to make an adjustment to our pay. If we, either our benefits or our pay. If that person has $10,000 worth of more benefits per year, so I guess what I'm still grappling with is to make sure our total compensation package is comparable or where we want it to be. But again, if I look at the benefit study that you did do, it sounds like, at least from a median standpoint, we're at least at median.
Yes. Based on what we saw in the benefits, like I said, out of all the benefits, there was only one anomaly, and that was that family coverage of benefits. I would anticipate, if we were to put numbers to everything, that we're probably going to see right now, like fire and police are leading by 1.1% and some other small percentage, that we might see it be around the same number, just because I didn't see any significant anomalies with the data. The big dollar items, we did capture dollar amounts for health insurance, dental, vision. Those are usually the big dollar ones. Things like EAP are usually like $1 per head per month, and it doesn't matter what, The other difference that I saw was with retirement. The market was paying on average 13%. The city's is 12.3%, so it's like a 0.7%. So everything really kind of was really, really close.
Is that in here, the retirement number?
Yes, it is actually on the summary is on slide 12, and then when we The more detailed is on, getting to it, I should have, on slide 50, where it breaks it all down by each of the levels, sworn police, and then the different
okay, I see.
types.
It's on
of-
50?
Yeah, that's where the more detail is. It breaks it down by the level of employee and then by the type of retirement benefit. Like if it's Tennessee retirement system, or if it's a defined benefit or a defined contribution, like a 401A, 457.
Yeah, it would actually be really tough for us now that I think about it, because we're going to have, 2/3 of our employees that are on the pension piece or whatever the number is, and 1/3 that are on a 401K. So it'd actually be really hard for us to actually make an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah,
Okay.
So, and I guess that, so if we're looking at, it is hard to compare, because if it's a 401K, we're offering 8%, but there's not sufficient data to be able to look at what other people are offering. But if they're in the defined benefit, they may be offering 13%, which really that number is 14 to 12, I think, is what we've seen in the past. Because at one point we were almost 15%, I think.
Yeah, and that contribution rate really depends on how the plan is invested, its financial performance. To me, the bigger piece on the pension plan isn't so much the 12.3 contribution, 12.3% contribution rate. The real benefit is it's 2 years per year service for high five.
Yeah.
That really is where the employee is going to compare things.
and I think with on the 457, with a lot of organizations, particularly if they participate in the Tennessee retirement system, we typically don't tend to see a lot of organizations matching for the defined benefit. They may offer it, but it's a voluntary, typically, contribution, since they're contributing to the retirement system.
Our newer employees are on a 401K that we're matching. The ones hired before 2010, I think, are the ones, they're all in the pension piece of it. That makes it.
So it's one or the other, right? It's not both, because I made that mistake. And that's what we find in most organizations. It's either one or the other, not both.
You've done a great job. We appreciate that. With me just getting, and I'm sure the other council members and the mayor just getting this information, I'm sure we'll have a whole lot of other questions. But two questions kind of pops out at me. The first one, is there a page that breaks down the minimum, max, and mid of all of the jobs that you surveyed? Is there a page that...
It's not in the report. However, it is a supplemental working document that Glenn has access to. It's not in this report. It's a pretty long sheet of paper. It's like a legal size, and it's even tiny font, and so it just wouldn't fit in this particular.
But you have it where we can review it?
Yeah.
Okay. And
I would, one thing, we're talking about the summary, the minimums. Never mind, I'm sorry. Thank you. We do.
oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I had another one. Do you have, were you commenting?
Go ahead.
And my second question was, when I talked to you earlier, you told me that there were a few classes that you felt was too high and a few classes that were too low. And you shared that with Mr. Godwin. Can you share that? What classes did you find high and what?
Oh, you know what? When we do market studies, it's pretty typical. I don't think I've ever done a study where I didn't find in an organization some jobs were being paid, appeared on the surface to be well over market and some well under market, and then a big group in the middle. And I do have that detailed in this report. You can see those. I talk about starting on page 30.
Uh-huh.
If we look at page 30, this is where we start. And page 30 talks about there were 3 individual jobs. And I think it's important to keep in mind, so I don't want to pick on any jobs, right? But these are only reflective of the jobs that were benchmarks, right? Because we can't benchmark every job. We wouldn't get anybody to respond to our survey. And we know that there are some jobs that just aren't benchmarkable, like they aren't common in the marketplace. So that being said, These are only reflective of those jobs in which we were able to collect enough data on and they were benchmark jobs. So no one feels, But anyway, page 30 talks about the 3 jobs that we found that appeared on the surface to be significantly misaligned with the market. Now, like I said, important to keep in mind, just because this initial data says that the actual salaries in the marketplace, when compared to your midpoint, you guys are way over market, doesn't necessarily mean that it's over, a bad thing. Okay? It's an indicator that you want to look at the jobs more closely.
And these really could be, like where we've got the next page on 31 where you have 7 individual jobs range midpoints or possibly misaligned. This is going to either be a plus or minus,
Right.
either direction.
Yes, that is correct. So that was 31. Then 32 and 33 are those that fall within the competitive and highly competitive, and that was the majority of the jobs.
So can I ask you a question? Maybe, this is something that came up a couple years ago, and inevitably it comes up this year, and we want to, make sure from I mentioned to you earlier about you could go out on the website, which was, blew me away, frankly, that I was like, you can't put that on the internet, but it's all out there. If we had a policy on that, I'd say we don't do that anymore if other municipalities aren't, but, one of the things I think kind of it breeds through this process is, when kind of you need to have some sort of a working relationship with our staff as you're preparing this, and that there's a perception certainly that, if you during that process that gives the opportunity for staff to kind of massage it and get it to a point where really the staff just does it. You just come up here and give us the presentation. So there's some. I'm sorry. I don't mean that to be.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
You understand that?
That's a great question.
So can you give us, from your point of view, we will separately can ask staff members, but from your point of view, how does that process work? I mean, look, I'll ask a very specific question to go along with that. The process, certainly I'd love to hear from your angle, but also, we need to know that there wasn't manipulation, right, of the numbers, that some things, yes, there could have been some changes made, but what kind of certainty can you give us from your point of view as to the manipulation of the numbers piece?
Sure. So let me kind of walk you through the process of how we do it and how I share the information with staff. I provide we gather all the data. I put it in summary form, by job, and then an overall summary. And I share it because it's important, to make sure that we're on the same page. They know the direction or what I'm finding, where it's headed. And I give it to them in a PDF document. I don't give it to them in an Excel document until all is said and done. Everything's in PDF documents, and this is what it is. And it's total summary for each job and then the overall organization. I can't say that I've ever had a client, a staff, city staff person or someone I've worked with ask me to change any of the data that we collected. One of the things about Gallagher, we've won the Ethisphere Award. It's an ethics award for the past 6 years or something like that. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on is ethical work practices. And if I would tell you that if I had a client who asked me to manipulate data that in such a way to have numbers come out to a certain way, I wouldn't be in front of you today, because they would probably no longer be a client of ours, because we don't operate that way.
I mean, are there any ways, and I'm digging here a little bit, but are there any ways, not necessarily to manipulate the data, but to to the way that the language that's in here to make it look more favorable or less favorable. I mean, any even of that would occur or could occur that you could see, or could we view this in a different way that might be a different light on this, or it's pretty much this is the data and that's it? I mean,
Oh, yeah, this is we always say the numbers are the numbers. If there was any assistance that I have, because I do this every day, I probably use terminology and stuff that might not be necessarily layman's terms or that everybody would understand. So if there was any assistance, it was helping me, letting me know that people aren't going to understand what that means. So can you put it in layman's terms? But any number, any chart on here is strictly from my working files and my data. So the only assistance I got with regards to content was
It's an Amber Alert in Georgia.
sorry.
just helping to clarify stuff and like what does the 50th percentile mean and what is the range? What do you mean? That is the only thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
yeah, absolutely.
Ms. Gels Harris.
I'm going to piggyback off of that, what Mr. LaLance just asked. When you had questions, whatever questions you had, did you just ask one person, or was there a committee? And the reason why, in the city, and the reason why I'm asking that is that we have no one on staff that has the experience nor the expertise to answer any questions on a pay survey. So did you ask just one person, or did the city have a committee that when you had questions, they got together and gave you an answer? Because here again, we have no one on staff that has the expertise nor the experience to answer salary questions that I'm aware of.
I had a single point of contact at the city, and then
Let me see if I can
Yeah.
offer some assistance. I believe it was earlier this week, we received a working draft of the document. We were in the conference room. It was Ms. Wright, Ms. Tucker, Mr. Godwin, Ms. Russell, Ms. Corbin, and myself on a speakerphone with her to say, we're turning pages. This heading doesn't make sense. Can you please explain this comment? So while there was no committee, because it was Gallagher's work product, when we reviewed the draft this week, it was done by several of us. And I think subsequent, after you were on the phone for part of the call,
Yes.
we took notes, and then Mr. Godwin, Ms. Russell, and Ms. Corbin, I think we're going to call to make sure everybody's notes from the meeting were captured. So yes, we had multiple people involved in reviewing the draft. These are Gallagher numbers.
that is correct.
I just gotta stand up for a second.
That's okay. That's okay. But that is really the only input that I got from city staff throughout this, process. When I would hit certain milestones, I would say, here it is in an uneditable document, and I still had my originals, but nobody came back and asked me to change anything, modify anything, anything of that nature at all.
Did you have job descriptions when you looked at these?
Yes, I had your guys. It's been a while since we did the survey. I had your job descriptions. I had an employee census. I had, I think, policies and procedures. I have a whole list that I asked for at the beginning of the project and that they sent, that Glenn had sent to me. Also, if I misinterpreted anything, I got clarification on misinterpreting something, which is not uncommon. Whenever we do surveys, we're always following up with participants, clarifying information, so not uncommon.
Yeah, the reason why I asked, I know 2 jobs look like, and here again, I'm just seeing this, so I have to dig into it more, but 2 jobs, the description has changed since the last survey, but the salary didn't change. That's why I asked.
Okay.
And I'll look into that myself.
Okay.
Is it easy for us to get average numbers as opposed to median numbers? Is it easy to put that in a format?
Oh, if you wanted to look at what the average numbers were?
Yeah, like
I have that. Yeah, I
where we
could.
are
It would
versus the
take me
average.
just to do the overall comparison. It would take me a couple of keystrokes, and I could get that to you.
And that's where, Mr. Lyons, I think, I can't speak for the other council members. I want to be able to study this. I really want to look at, as we talk about hard to fill jobs and even the employees that we're competing, even regionally now. And I may be looking at this the wrong way, but I was telling Mr. Lance, I think it's great to say that we're at the median, but I don't want to be at the median. I don't tell my kids, hey, I want you to be average on this test today. I want you, I want you to be in the median, be right at the middle of the bell curve. I tell them I want you to be up here. So I think what I really would like to see is if there's the possibility that we're able to go through and say, we want whatever positions the council decides that, I know we've had discussions about police that we go through and we say, look, and we talked about this at our retreat, that, okay, we're going to put a premium on these jobs. We don't just want to be at the median. We want to be leading the market, where people look at Murfreesboro and say they're the leaders in the market, not median. So that's really, I think, the discussion that as we study this, that we're going to have to make the decision on where we are and what the dollar number is associated with that.
And this really is the first step. We had established the median. Now that we have the numbers, if the council wants to step back and look at a different philosophy, we're absolutely supportive of that. And we can chase the numbers. Knowing that you just got a 60-some page document, and my suggestion to you was going to be, let's get back together in a week or two in a workshop, and
And I have
work
one
through
more
our
suggestion, and I think you're dead on. We workshop everything, thanks to Councilman Lance. Blaming that on you. No, kidding. I really would like to see, and maybe this is as a discussion with the council, that we've talked about fire and police. We changed our MAG study, and we talk about that fire and police are more career positions, that you do have an officer that may start as an officer and 25 years later they're still an officer. In our new MAG study that we've gone to, I really would like to see us talk about the discussion of for public safety, those career positions that you highlighted out, that we look at a STEP program like what we used to have for those career positions, that someone can easily say, if I'm at the midpoint and I'm going to be a firefighter, or we've talked about relief driver. If you're going to be a relief driver, then you go from X step to Y step. But I think that's something we need to talk about for those career positions.
Okay. Both chiefs have discussed that, so we'll be glad to add that to the discussion for the workshop.
Let me just make one comment. So much hinges upon where you establish this market median. And to the point that the mayor was making, if our competition is at the upper end of that, and we're bringing in other cities that are driving that to the median that we're seeing here, our competition may be, and this isn't what you did, you did your study like we asked you to do, but what I'm saying is the question that we have to do is, who is our competition for the jobs that we are trying to fill? And if they're on the higher end of that scale forming and we're in the middle, then we're not going to be competitive with those jobs. So I'd like to see a little bit, pick the chicken apart a little bit more and let me see where, I'd like to see where those that we would consider competitive to us are, where those cities are in your establishing this median market. Because if you've picked Knoxville and then someone, I'm not sure that's going to be the driver to someone from our public safety positions. But somebody like Franklin or someone in that area might, Nashville might. So do you understand what I'm trying to ask?
Are you asking what are these other organizations' pay philosophy? Are they paying at the median, or are they paying at a higher, like the 60th or 70th?
Exactly. Where are they in relationship to the median that
So
you've
what is
established?
their pay target?
Right, right.
We you know, we've had this, the chiefs, we've had this discussion quite a bit, that specifically on the discussion on, you know, I don't know how many officers we've got that drive from Murfreesboro or Rutherford County that work in Davidson County that, you know, are good officers, that if we were able to adjust where we're not at the median and we're able to more actively compete against municipalities that we're losing talent that's driving, that we may be able to say just by 1% or 2% or whatever that number is, we're able to immediately say, well, I'm not going to drive, you know, 35 miles in traffic to Nashville. I'm staying in Rutherford County. And that's real. So I think, you know, if we're looking at, you know, places that maybe are not, and this is not looking at recruiting, but this is maybe looking at where we could pull or retain our people where they're not looking at other opportunities. So Davidson County, Mount Juliet, Williamson County, you know, Franklin, Brentwood, those areas. Now,
Rutherford County Sheriff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's specific. Yeah, Rutherford County. You know, we've lost officers to Rutherford County. So
I mean, I think the question maybe is this: is that, you know, essentially, you know, the way that you know, we view this from a policy perspective is that, you know, I would expect Rob to get now with the department heads to kind of go, you know, look, Chief Durr, you know, here are 10 cities that we marked you against. We're showing that we're X on the median, but really there are 4 of those cities that are the ones where we lose all of our folks to. So let's, I think, carve the chicken down a little bit more to get, let's see what do those 4 cities do, because that's what's going to happen to keep retention numbers how we want them, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's
yeah,
exactly
yeah.
right.
So I mean, if we, and that may be, you know, beyond, you've done what we've asked you, and we need to know the bigger picture, because we do lose people to Memphis or to Clarksville or Chattanooga sometimes, but.
And
You know.
I have a question, because I find police and fire to be rather interesting, actually. And when it comes to, and this is maybe just kind of a rhetorical question, but when it comes to folks who are leaving the city of Murfreesboro for like a state of Tennessee or a much larger organization, it always raises a question in my mind about promotional opportunities. If these are people who are striving, the reason, are they leaving because of pay? Or are they leaving to go to a larger organization because the opportunity for advancement is greater because there's more opportunities versus, I've been here for a few years, I've been a cop for a while, I want to move up the ranks, and I just, I'm looking at the people ahead of me, and it's going to be a really long time before I have that opportunity. So I just kind of, something to think about when it comes to people leaving, particularly to larger organizations.
we've had, you know, I think we've discussed more on police over the last 6 months, but you know, and you see this with larger departments. So, you know, with departments combined with police and fire over 500 employees, there's only a finite amount of what you would say management positions. So I think what we have to do, in my opinion, knowing that it's going to be harder for people to move up that ladder because there's so few positions and so many people who possibly want those positions, we have to make sure that if you're not in that promotional chain at that time, that you're still well compensated for what you're doing. And that way, that you know, the majority, you may have 20 or 30% that want to move into that management chain, but we need to make sure that the 70% that are your officers, firefighters, drivers are very well compensated, that, you know, they can look and say, you know, I really don't want to go somewhere else. I'm happy where I am. And then when the opportunity opens up, that it may be there. And that's what I think, that's what we're seeing. Police, at least, I could say, you know, nationally, that's from my goal when we originally started talking about this, was to make sure that we're not just getting 300 applicants, that we're getting the best applicants that we can get. And I think that's what, the goal of the entire council is.
One of the things that we're struggling with is that maybe 1 out of 10 that we've seen leave are going to the FBI or TBI. 9 out of 10 are, you won't understand this completely, but Smyrna, Rutherford County, which is here. I mean, that's our, where we are. They're just going to the county sheriff's department instead of here. So it's not like 8 out of 10 are going to find bigger and better things in bigger organizations. We're struggling with how do we take care of it now. That's probably another reason why you might detect a little bit of median is probably not good enough.
Okay.
But to set the narrative, I think our job is we're looking at the glass is not just half empty, it's broken and cracked, and we're trying to figure out how to put it together. But I think we have to look at the totality that, there are some things that we can work on, but as a whole, we've got a pretty good story to tell over the last 6 or 7 years. Now, there's things that we absolutely can improve on, but, we're definitely have got our challenges and opportunities that we'll fix, but we're not everything that we see here is not minus 20 to 25% where we're
Heck yeah.
we're scared. So, to some extent, I think we have to be proud with our department heads and our employees that we've got some work to do, but we're a whole lot better than we were. How's that?
Amen.
I'm glad to hear you said 6 or 7 years, because that's kind of when I came on the council. But no,
Total coincidence.
Yeah, that was ironic, wasn't it? But this is kind of the whole deal that you're dealing with here is a lot of it's just philosophical, because ultimately you're standing in the 10th fastest growing city in the country right now. There's a reason people are coming to Murfreesboro, and there's a quality of life here that you may be able to go somewhere and make 50 cents an hour more, but you will not have the quality of life that you have living in Murfreesboro, and that so many people find attractive that they're coming here in droves. And there's no two jobs or no two people that are exactly the same, because we may not have the person who's in the median, but we may be paying him every bit of what he's worth, because he may not be the best employee in the world. And then again, we may have a high achiever employee who's doing 110% every day, and he's getting paid 100%. So you're never going to be exactly where you should be. So the attainable goal of saying we've got everybody's pay exactly where it should be, I just don't think it's going to happen. But I do think that you've done a tremendous amount of work here. I appreciate what you've done. You've compiled it well. It's very understandable, and I'm comfortable with the explanation that you gave as far as the reliability of the information you've provided, because I do think that you do seem to come across as being fair and honest and trustworthy, and I think that the information we've got, we've still got a lot of studying to do on it, because obviously we just got it, but it does seem to be very direct and to the point, and I guess ultimately we're responsible to the taxpayers just as responsible as we are to our employees. And although we want to say that we've got the best employees in the world, we also, on the other hand, we represent those employees, but we also represent people who elected us, and every penny that they send in as a tax penny, that we're responsible for making sure that we don't waste that money. And if we can hire an employee, and we've got people standing in line who are good employees who will work for whatever that price is, it doesn't matter what they're paying in Kansas City, Missouri. It only matters what they're paying in Murfreesboro and what the quality of life those people that are going to take that job and the job that they will perform once they're in that job will do. So, there's a lot of variables that there's just no way to quantify them. But I appreciate what you did.
So would now be a bad time to ask if we can we vote on anything tonight? Can we vote on not having council tomorrow so we can watch the Preds game tomorrow night, please?
Can we put it on the screen? And one, Mayor, you can do it.
Mayor, what,
Just invite everybody to come to the council chambers and we'll have it on the big screen. We'll talk about a few things.
Thank you so much for your hard work.
And one thing, yeah, when you finish, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you for doing this for us. I think this gives us something to work on, and it's a lot right now to take in, but we can study it. Rob, where will we?
what I was going to suggest maybe is if we could look at a date too. I'll have Ms. Tig call you in the morning. Let's look at a date maybe 2 weeks out and see if we can match up with her schedule. We might have a little bit of travel expense to bring her back, but I think it would be helpful if we can meet again, have a follow-up meeting, and perhaps have her here and see what questions have developed in the 2 week period.
The other part too, I know we're going to have, because we've talked about when did we start this? This was back, we started this at the water and sewer plant when we talked about doing this back at our fall retreat. So it's been anticipated, but how can we get this on our website, or how can we, if employees want to be able to look at this?
Great question. We do want to make this transparent and open to our employees, so we'll get the file electronically and push it out through the city's intranet.
Okay.
It's excellent.
Let me ask one question, just as I'm thinking of this, and it may be a question for later on, but you had mentioned something about an annual look at this. This is like a snapshot. How productive would that be to do an annual?
The annual update that I referenced earlier in the report was more of we have metrics that are we subscribe to of how is pay changing, how are salary structures changing in the market. World at Work does this huge survey of employers. It breaks it down by, public sector, all of this. And they'll say, they survey actual employers, and employers will say, we're on average, our structures are moving in the Memphis, Tennessee area by 2.3%. So then I would, suggest to staff that we would recommend you adjust your salary structures by 2.3% because that's what we're seeing is going to be happening in the market next fiscal year. So if you want your structures to keep pace with how salaries are moving, based on the comparative metrics.
Is it so dynamic that would change in a course of?
It does. There are two metrics that change every year, and that's what we get this report. And you can get also from Bureau of Labor Statistics. You have to break down all these numbers, but pay changes in the marketplace. So that could be promotional, merit, cost of living adjustment, the whole spectrum. And it'll tell you how much is people's pay moving throughout the year, or what have organizations budgeted for pay changes for employees for the following year, as well as how are their pay structures moving. Yep, every year. We get a report every year.
And based on that, we have to bring our people up to standard. And even though, the survey is showing we okay here, we got to step it up. We have to bring our people up to standards. We have to do it. If we're the 10th fastest growing city, we have to keep up with inflation. And this is an excellent report, but our people are not up to standard.
That's why I think it's important, when you look at the numbers and the metrics, and, we have these defined criteria for what's competitive and whatnot. It's really what is working for the city, and it's just a metric of a point in time. And so, and we provide you with that, and then you guys can, decide, where you need to go from there based on that data.
How do you like our city?
I love it. I've never been to Tennessee,
Good answer,
and I
'cause we've
love
not-
it. I'm sad I have to leave tomorrow.
Thank you, because I don't think they've sent your final payment out yet. So that was a good answer.
It's a beautiful city.
Thank
It's
you.
beautiful.
All right.
Thank you.
No motions to cancel council tomorrow night?
Yes.
Does there have to be one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, all right.
Are we canceled again?
No, I don't. We're advertised. We can't do that. I wish we could. All right. Any other business? Seeing none? Stand adjourned.